This
All right.
conference will now be recorded.
All right. Well, everyone, welcome to our June uh, salon with our fabulous guest Jennifer or Jenny Sasser, who is has a PhD in and is an educational gerontologist, transdisciplinary scholar, and community activist who is focused on creativity in later life, aging and embodiment, transdisciplinary curriculum design, critical gerontological theory, transformational adult theory practices or learning practices, and cross-generational collaborative inquiry. She is the co-author of Blood Stories, am I going to say this correctly? Menarche and the Politics of the Female Body in Contemporary U.S. Society?
Close. Menarche.
Menarche. Okay.
Yeah.
I've probably only ever, sometimes when you only see words and you're like, I'm
Yes.
not actually sure how to say that. All right.
Yes.
And Politics of the Female Body in Contemporary U.S. Society, and Aging, Concepts and Controversies with Harry Moody, and the author of Gerontology, The Basics. So she's obviously knows a lot of stuff about gerontology. She also serves as a conversation facilitator for Oregon Humanities and offers consulting workshops and presentations throughout North America. She is currently affiliated with the Portland Community College Gerontology Program and is the lead instructor for the Oregon State University Portland Human Development and Family Sciences Program. And you probably all saw the e-newsletter about this. And if you haven't already, I recommend you check out her wonderful blog, the Geropunk Project. And the link is on the mid-month newsletter, and I think the calendar as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jenny. And thanks,
Thank you
Jenny,
so
for
much.
coming.
Yeah, thank you for that intro and thank you for inviting me. And I'm sorry for all the fancy pants words in that bio. That's my professional bio where fancy pants words are really important. But what it all boils down to is that for most of my life, I've been very curious about and interested in understanding more deeply our human experience as we travel through the life course, the increasingly long life course. And both as an individual journey, but also from the standpoint of being interconnected with other humans and other creatures. And so that's really what all of that boils down to, is I'm interested in what it means to be a human being who travels through time in a particular body and in particular contexts. And the world that we are a part of right now is particularly interesting, to say the least. And for the last going on 4 months, I've been hunkered down and pretty focused on staying safe and keeping others safe and adapting my teaching practice so that it's completely online and remote, and devising creative ways so that students feel engaged and connected. I haven't been doing as much writing as I wish. My brain has sort of felt like it's frozen. So I've been doing a lot of editing of things that have already been written, just to sort of feel like I'm still in that flow. But I'm hoping for some creative spark to catch as we begin to head into a new season and a new phase. What I thought that we might do to warm up is if we were in person and having a salon, which I really love doing, I like to start with some sort of a little story or a poem, sometimes even an image, but some object that can help us sort of hold space for whatever might emerge in our conversation. And so I thought I might read a little piece I've been working on since January. So I started this pre-pandemic. And so some of it in terms of, you'll see, it'll be obvious, are things that I am not doing currently in the same way. But I think that the themes captured in this little piece are sort of transcendent and important themes regardless. And so I thought I would just read this. It's not very long, and then we could see what we might want to talk about. And anything goes. So whatever is on your mind that you would enjoy exploring together, I would be more than happy to facilitate that exploration. So a version of this is on the Geropunk Project blog. And this is a more refined version of it. I have a series of little essays that I've written for the blog. And I should say that the blog is not academic writing. The blog is my own and also others. I have invited others to publish their writing as well in the blog. It's really personal experience based writing, and it's very exploratory. And I have a series on the blog that's over the last few years called Aging in Place. And I know that this is a really important, potent idea for all of you, given where the community in which you live. And it's a really important concept in gerontology. And it's a concept that people use sort of assuming that we all have shared understanding of what it means. And one of the things I really like to do as a teacher and a writer and an activist is sort of question, well, what do we mean when we use these words? And what are the different manifestations of something like wanting to age in place? What does that mean? And what are those places where we might age together and individually, and for whom? So who has access to aging in place? So this little piece is part of that larger curiosity that I have. So here we go. We had traveled half a block down our neighborhood street, walking so slowly through the morning chill that we risked toppling over. At the time, Happenstance, or Happy for short, was 15, and his dog's life would soon come to an end. I, his loyal companion, had only days before celebrated my 53rd birthday. Happy had just come to a wobbly stop and was deeply involved in sniffing the grass in front of Tamar's house, right as she happened to be heading down the block toward us, a grocery bag in each hand. I waved to her and wondered to myself where she was returning home from at such an early hour, and what she was carrying in the grocery bags. She was likely walking home from the bus stop up on 17th Avenue. She usually rides the bus, as always has, as she never learned to drive, though most Sundays a family member or friend gives her a ride to church or out for a special meal. Tamara waved back at me, smiling shyly. Happy and I waited in front of her house for her to arrive so we could chit-chat and catch up. After exchanging pleasantries, Tamar asked if it had been me who had left the big bag of persimmons on her front stoop a few weeks back, and thanked me for my thoughtfulness, if indeed it had been me. She mentioned, as she had many times before, how much her late husband, Sanjay, loved persimmons, and what a treat they are to receive, and how many happy memories they hold. Our conversation then turned to my daughter Isabel, who had just returned to France for graduate school after having been home for the winter holidays. Tamar mentioned having caught a couple of glimpses of Izzy and how proud she was of her and the young woman she has become. And wouldn't Connie, who used to live in the house right across the street from Tamar, be so proud of Izzy too? Connie and Tamar are still best friends, though Connie died 3 years ago after having been a widow for decades. Connie didn't believe in Halloween, but every October 31st for a decade, she would show up on our front stoop before dusk, candy in hand, to offer to Izzy, a reverse trick or treat. Halloween happens to be my favorite holiday, so having an empty nest for the past few years has meant that unless at least a couple of neighborhood kids deign to cast a shadow on my stoop, I'm plunged into a dark place, made all the worse by the surfeit of unclaimed mini candy bars I'm left with. Halloween 2018 was particularly bleak, so much so that I told my tale of woe to the two little girls who live in the house in between my house and Tamar's house. The big sister of the pair, who incidentally gives spontaneous backyard solo performances of improvised songs about the hassles of having a little sister and parents who thwart her most amazing plans, made a promise on the spot to not leave me alone on future Halloweens. She and her little sister and a small gang of their pals made good and showed up on the most recent Halloween, demanding treats, and Big Sister proudly announced that she had fulfilled her promise. Fred, Connie and Tamara's other best friend, and one of my best friends too, never got to meet the two little neighbor girls as he died over a decade ago, before they were born. Wonderful Fred, the angel of our neighborhood, lived in the same house for 80 years, next to Connie and across from me. Fortunately, Fred knew the little girl's parents, and he has been made real to them through the stories they tell about him, and his resplendent, unruly garden, and his shocking generosity. Fred is gone, and so is his garden, the paradise where I spent many summers working by his side. In its place, a new, huge house, and tenants I have yet to meet. Connie is gone too, and so is her sprawling, singular brick house, since replaced by another new, huge house, occupied by a family I've met only once, and whom I rarely see. But Tamar and I and the little girls and their parents still dwell in our mature, scaled-down homes, and we all remember Connie and Fred, as well as John, who lived 2 blocks over, on the way to the park, and we love them still, not only as figures in our memories, but actively in the present because of who they continue to be in our lives. Call me a late bloomer, or maybe just in the right place at the right time, but much of what I've learned about how to create and nurture connections with others, I learned from the elders and the children in my neighborhood. My older friends haven't been particularly gregarious, nor have my older friends been similar beyond their shared generational experiences and living on the same neighborhood street for decades. They came from diverse backgrounds in terms of nationality, culture, beliefs, and life experiences. They were diverse, and at first blush, they nor we had much in common except proximity. But what each of them has possessed is a spirit of friendship, an openness to and curiosity about others. Even in the face of great personal loss, divorce and remarriage, decades of widowhood, financial challenges, uneasy relationships with adult children, chronic and terminal illness, massive changes all around them, they each found a way to stay engaged in life, in living, and connect to others.
I was going to say that during gatherings recently and before, um, oftentimes the topic of moving to a new location or moving from the family home, of course, to a maybe a community and elder, and for elders, and um, or just being practical about where to live in the later years. That topic has come up, um, and yeah, it seems like what you mentioned in the story, this sense of community and relationships, is so important for a sense of place or being connected, and of course having support, any physical supports, especially in later in life. I mean, that's what we're about with the village. And but anyway, that's a topic that does come up, just the struggle of that big decision of moving from the family home to something that's more reasonable, or as far as being able to take care of the place or being safer, or it's pretty,
Yeah,
it's a big decision. But
yeah,
it's
it's a
like,
really big deal.
I've always thought that the sooner, not to wait too long though, because being out and having the relationships in your community is, that just doesn't happen overnight.
Mm-mm.
Like your story shows.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
moving to that, maybe your final home to build community is I think really important.
Yeah, and it's really interesting to observe as well that it's proximity is not, it's a maybe a prerequisite, but it's not enough to create. I mean, there's being neighborly, and then there's actually developing relationships. And there are now people living on our street that I've not met. And I'm kind of a shy person. And so, maybe I leave a basket of figs, but like there doesn't seem to be that kind of, where you have that feeling of mutuality energetically. Like you might wave at somebody across the street and you think, oh, I think they might like me. They might be open to interacting with me. And that's sort of motivation then to see what happens. And I've noticed that spark doesn't seem to be there in the way that it was when I moved to this neighborhood now. Almost, I mean, I raised my daughter here and she's 24. And so, a long time ago, I was young, in a much different life course stage. And I felt like people were really watching out for us.
Oh,
And now, now I have this relationship with the little girls next door. And, but, our old people they're dying. And
uh-huh.
so like it's a different neighborhood. And I think a lot about that, about legacy, and like how can one of the big learnings from me has been about that spirit of friendship, and how do I carry that practice into the world,
Yeah.
um, especially a world that seems, it's hurting so much, and there's a lot of mutual distrust about strangers, and what are people safe? What are their motives?
Hmm.
And those are real concerns. And yet, like, if we don't carry that spirit, like, we have no hope of really connecting.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as an elder and as we age, it seems, and yet it's not there maybe as much, but yet it's still, how do we change that? Maybe as elders, that could be our role, initiating some more of that spirit. But then
Well, and
adding,
also, yeah,
add,
children are teachers too, right? I mean, the little girls take, it goes, I like to think about how that spirit goes in all directions. And so it's not just as an elder, we give down the chain, the
yeah,
generational chain, which we can, and I believe in it, but also it comes in the other direction. The little girls watch out for me, and they leave treats on my doorstep, and they make sure I'm not alone on Halloween.
right, yeah, 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 uh-huh, huh.
but their parents also are part of that, right? Their parents have cultivated for their little girls this spirit of like it's
Connect.
okay, it's safe. Like we're all watching out for each other. You can go next door and talk to Jenny. You get to do that. So they've sort of vetted me and others in the neighborhood so that their little girls can feel that sense of like this little place is safe, right? There are other people besides my parents who I can go to and trust and play with and
Yeah, right. hmm Yeah.
other thoughts that come to mind from that story or questions, experiences you all have had.
I find that I've always been really open to getting to know my neighbors, like in the houses I've lived in. And it's in some places it is harder to do than others. If you have a large community of people who are all working at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, it's harder to get to know them. But I've always kind of been that way myself, where I keep an eye out for my older, younger,
Yeah,
whoever the neighbor is.
excellent.
Um, but I've totally lost where what else I was gonna say with that. But it is definitely something you have to inculcate in yourself and just try to be open. And it is interesting to see as we've had more people move from other places, maybe from like bigger cities that don't have that kind of culture. It makes me wonder if that changes, you know, things.
Uh, We're trying to get our uh, part in. Is there any? There it is down there. Is it?
I think they can hear
Mick?
you.
Yeah, we can hear
Okay.
you. Go ahead.
But how about the back
Yeah,
side of
not
the?
right now.
Okay, he's working on it.
Just
Okay.
something you wanted to say.
Yeah, I sure did. Well, I'll give you a little bit of my background. I grew up in Connecticut, went to college in Massachusetts at Wellesley. I then went overseas and met my first husband. Uh, and we were in Lebanon when we met,
Mm.
married, and went to Canada. He was a Canadian. Um, then we ended up in the Foreign Service. He was a teacher and a coach. But his Foreign Service background helped him with knowing and being able to act with people easily. For me, it was more of a struggle. Some of it was academic, and some of it was um, just it's hard for me to pick up languages, for instance, because I don't have a fast move from one place to the other in the brain at this point. So, over a period of time, 25 years in all, we were with the Canadian Foreign Service. And that shows many different behaviors, especially the ones that we all are familiar with, um, the ones about close up and far back, the standing differences they say today. Um, so I'd have to be thinking a long time about now closer in. Actually, and it's funny, physically, I'm closer in now to what it is to be an American. Because when you're living overseas under the umbrella of a Canadian and having to move every 2 to 4 years, things change inside that regularly, and you have to be quite stable to survive. So there's a whole nother batch of people that have to be considered um, part of their lives. How far can you go with your ordinary ways of behaving before you bump into something that's a core value of others? Uh, that to me is really important. Leave you.
How are you doing in your neighborhood, Sue, where you live?
Well, wonderful.
How,
Last
how do you how do you feel about the
Hi.
relationships in your neighborhood?
we had a party celebration. What would you call ours? Extended sidewalk party the other night,
Oh,
and
good.
that
Yeah,
how else can you call it?
there was one neighborhood couple we decided to get together with,
Yeah,
either in the driveway or on the open air deck
yeah. Nice.
every
I think with this
week
virus,
or
that's one of
so.
the blessings that we're having is that people are getting out in the neighborhood more, I noticed, where whole families will be walking, taking a walk, or, yeah, oftentimes I see gatherings like in the middle of an intersection where people have their
Mm.
distance, yet they're being social. So it's really amazing. It's one of the, I think, true blessings of
Yes,
this virus is that neighborhoods are, I feel like my neighborhood anyway, is sort of come alive um,
yes,
with all different generations. It's quite amazing.
Yeah, there's one other face-to-face activity that we get most every week, and that is 6 foot distance hiking
Uh
Mm.
huh.
with two ladies from our hiking club, which ordinarily puts 2 dozen people out on the trail every Wednesday.
Uh huh. And
So
yet now you
also,
have a few still showing up.
I'm sorry,
You still have a few showing up for hiking.
yeah.
it's not a few showing up to a just show up hike. It's us and two other people at a regularly scheduled hike. We
Oh,
Mm.
change, we change locations every week,
Mm.
so we coordinate.
Mhm.
Hmm. I
I'm
think
a big hiker as well, but I have a lot of visual impairments, and so it's hard for me to navigate the. It's hard for me to communicate if I can't see people talking. So the mask thing is kind of difficult.
oh yeah.
And then the navigating a complex environment with my vision issues, if I also have to worry about social distancing,
Oh,
has been a pretty big challenge for me, and it's made me curious about what how other people who have some visual or auditory challenges, what this has been like for them as well. Um, I mean, I've found that I definitely am. I was saying before we got started, like I haven't really ventured out yet beyond doing my grocery shopping and taking walks with my husband, but and it occurs to me that I think in part it's because it takes a lot of focus and energy already for me to navigate the world. And so
yeah.
now it's like, wow, like, can I do that? Like, can I?
Yeah. Another
Uh,
dimension, another dimension that affects me more than Sue is that I have a plot in the nearby community garden. So, like, I've been
oh,
up there prior to this, I've been up there for 2 hours this morning harvesting and transplanting and watering. And you never know who else is going to be there at the same time you are, because there's over 100 plots and probably a dozen of those within easy hollering distance.
mm,
Nice.
and
Which
it's good
garden?
for me
Which
too because
garden is that, Ray?
it leaves the space in the house to me while he's out
Hmm.
doing what he likes to do very much.
That's
And
right.
nice.
yes, it is. As I have conditions to do with mobility and um, balance, particularly.
Mm,
So,
So I can slide off something and I have to keep my eyes
I,
focused
so
all the time.
when Sue comes along, we take a lawn chair for her to sit and read in nearby, where
At
it's
the yeah.
easy for me to make sure that I know where she is.
Yeah.
that's great.
it's
Ray,
one.
which garden is it, Ray?
I'm sorry.
Which garden do you use?
Oh, Fulton Park.
Oh, uh-huh.
If you start from Burlingame, Fred Meyer, and head toward downtown, it's
Hmm.
just a couple of blocks along that way on the right.
Near
I
the
know that
church.
one. Yeah, that's a
Mm,
nice
Yeah,
one.
I've been there for about 8 years.
Hmm.
Nice. Hmm.
that's really
Yeah,
worked out
you get
well.
to you get to know a lot of people casually.
Uh-huh.
Hmm.
But you have to make the effort, and that seems to work pretty well. He doesn't mind going up and introducing himself. I think for
Hmm.
me, I find it harder. It's
Mm.
ironic because of the background, but I still feel it's important.
What
Hmm.
was your background?
I had full education up to
Hmm.
EED.
Hmm.
Uh, I had, after that, I had a few years overseas, but it was sporadic because most countries in those days would not hire somebody from another country for the
Mm.
school.
Hmm.
The last posting, I did have a posting to Indonesia and in
Mm.
the American school in Indonesia. Um,
Wow.
So that was so much fun. It was really remarkable because we were very, very limited on material things.
Mm.
But there's a lot of talking back and forth with the kids because they were all having to speak English in the classroom and maybe out in the playground. So that
Mm.
made some interesting differences for me. But we had a very short posting that time, so we were only there 2 years. So
Mm.
it just when
Yeah,
you're beginning to think, you begin to understand what the country or cultural
Mm.
background is, and no, you've just got started. It's too bad, but you can't go any further.
she's really talking about the first of her two careers. In the second one, she was a college professor.
Ah, okay.
And this is very unusual. This to come to this. This is the first time I've been to this type of panel group, and uh, yeah, sorry, just a minute. Um, um, my partner feels very comfortable joining other groups and doing different kinds of things with them. Um, Not always so much myself. I could say,
Hmm.
but walking is one thing we've been consistent about. Since the fall, we have missed only a couple of times of walking, just walking around the park, the Willamette Park, or walking somewhere else special one time. And that's brought a big relief. It's kind of a confession time.
Mm.
Trying not to blame too much, but it is confession.
Mm.
Um, and that's it. To me, moving, I'd rather not do it ever again, but we'll have to
Mm.
see what life brings.
Mhm.
Hmm.
So we'll
I was
see.
going to
Yeah,
ask you that,
you could
Ray,
say
and
we are aging in place in a house, a single family dwelling,
uh-huh.
and so far just hiring in help on a pretty rare basis. But
Hmm.
that would be the next episode in our life as needs become greater. We will
Hmm.
hire in more help to
Hmm.
try uh, to stay here as long as we can manage.
Yeah.
And if I could ask, um, always really curious about uh, when people begin to think about their future self as an older person. And it's in my teaching as a gerontologist, I have devised different ways to cultivate curiosity about that, especially with younger students, like imagining our future older self. And who we might want to be, and what aspects of who we are now we imagine will still be a part of our who we are, and how we might change, and how our environment might need to be. And it's often really difficult for people to reflect on that. And yet it's so important, right? I mean, we hear a lot in our society about the financial planning aspect of later life. Like, you really have to be saving for your retirement and getting your financial ducks in a row. But that deeper sort of emotional, you might even say spiritual aspect of imagining ourselves at a future point, we don't have a lot of help in how to do that. And certainly in my family, I didn't. My mom is in her 70s and still often completely surprised by being an older person, and by what it's like to try to keep her life going. So it's almost as though it never occurred to her, even though her daughter is a gerontologist. So I'm fascinated by that.
Yeah.
What are some of your experiences?
One of the things is the teachers, the pre-service teachers. The studies show that they grow up. Right. They grow up and they go to school and college, whatever, and then they get their job. And how many miles apart would you think this would be? How many miles would they have accumulated at 3 different places?
I don't know.
Well, the answer is 100. So the most that pre-service teachers usually move and do is 100. How many different diversities do they have?
Yeah.
And I'm not talking just racial. I'm talking even putting up blocks. You can see in some of those bigger schools that some of the kids sit, well, most, sit with their buddies. And who are their buddies? The ones who look just like them. So that to me was one of the hardest things, and it's obviously showing up in the news and everything now. Now, personally, I traveled a lot, as you know, and I had felt comfortable in other countries and places some people here would not be comfortable in. But that's because I've had years of doing that, and I know that you do the courtesy things first. Don't push for the core things, because the core things is where it gets very hot. So you have to learn to, all right, I can wear this strange dress with unique patterns because they made it for me, but don't take away my sleeves. You'll see that, and we saw it in the old days. Covered sleeves. You don't go anywhere if your shoulder isn't covered. So that's my experience.
So it sounds like that experience for you, that lifelong experience of
Yes.
being open to other societies and cultures, has cultivated for you this kind of curiosity about life and about thinking more broadly about your life, which I think is so valuable.
Right.
And has applications for, I mean, cultural diversity is one form of diversity, and age and generation is another form, right? And we are all of these different characteristics, and we carry them with us as we travel through the life course, and it really shapes what our experience is like, and also what opportunities we have as older adults, where we can live and with whom, and can we afford when we need help? Can we afford to pay someone to come so that we can stay in our own home? Can we afford to pay someone to come and help us out? Or do we need to live in a more communal setting for our own safety, but also so we have a community to be a part of. Um,
Yeah.
and do we think about that earlier? I think about it because professionally I'm trained to think about it, but
Sure.
it's easy
I've
to
always,
think about it for other people, and harder sometimes to think about it for ourselves. And so I'm always curious about people such as yourselves who've chosen to be part of something like the village movement. Like, how did you discover that? How did you make that commitment? Because it isn't a widespread commitment.
no.
You know,
Audrey,
Jenny,
do you have anything?
yes, I wanted to get back to your question about when did you feel old? And I had a year and a half ago, I had to leave my home for a lot of reasons, none of them bad. um, so I left my house, and 3 years prior to that, I had scoped out all my options, what to do, and I found an apartment. And so I did this thing called downsizing, and it seemed like a good idea. I couldn't really, I'm one person, I couldn't really keep up a whole house the size that I had. And after living here a year, or maybe a little less than a year, I started seeing my life as downsized. And
Mm,
I was ready to have my life downsized. My space, yes, but not my life. And
Yeah. Right.
moved to an apartment, and your garden automatically, because I don't have art, being a gardener.
mm,
And um, I was very upset by that. I was upset by the fact that people say, oh, downsizing, that's so great. But
Yes.
don't downsize your life just because you
mm-hmm,
downsize your space.
right.
And yet I felt that's what I had done because I'm a gardener. And now all I have is a little small balcony and a community garden. But that's not, it doesn't feel like it's mine. It doesn't feel right.
Mm,
And it makes me feel old.
mm,
Makes me feel
Yeah.
old. I've given up something I'm not ready to give up. I don't feel like I physically
mm,
give it up. And yet I've done that. And I thought when I moved that it would be enough. But it turns out that gardening is the one hobby I love to do. And I've given that up basically,
Mm.
it the way I want to do it. And so I'm kind of like, I think people better think twice before they downsize what they're doing. I didn't
What
anticipate, but I
can I ask
feel old because
when
mm,
you
not,
say you've
I'm
given
not
up?
able to use my body the
mm-hmm,
way
mm-hmm,
you do. And now
mm-hmm,
I find all these different ways I'm not interested in doing, going to a
mm-hmm, right. Yeah, that's so interesting in that it's not what I hear you saying is that something really essential about your identity and yourself in the world and what gives you pleasure, that you can't replace that with something else, like, well, just, ride a stationary bike or tend your
That's
window
right.
box. You've discovered retrospectively that
Yes.
you gave up a really essential part
yeah,
of your being. And so that, that requires some mourning. I mean, what I hear you saying is that you're mourning that.
not to mourn
Yes.
it.
Yeah,
I want
Very true. It'll go on forever now. I mean,
yeah,
until I go, because it was so important a part of
yeah,
my life for so long and so intensive. Well, look what's happening to the world today. And a
yeah,
lot of that's wound around what I mastered in, or
yeah.
wasn't just graduated in a degree.
Well, so this is part of the developmental journey of becoming an older person, which we're not really prepared for, which is
No.
how do we let how do we make sure that we can continue to cultivate those aspects of self that are so important to us? And if we need to adapt and make some changes, uh, how can we do that in a wise way? And then if we discover, like you have, Audrey, that we actually let go of something that we didn't want to let go of, like
Yeah.
what can you recapture any of that, or what can you discover about yourself in the process of realizing that? It's a very intense experience, it sounds like.
Sure. I could not do it without, well, I don't know what I would have done without Ray. He's back there somewhere. But it was timing that worked for us, and he is a very, very good uh, caregiver. But in that, you bring in another person into a place that you've had only for a few years, but still it's become sort of mine, and you have to watch out for that. Um, so changing who's around you all the time is a big concern as well, because you could disappear.
Well, either of us could get hit by a truck,
That's true.
but it's caregiving is a challenging life situation, but I think it's ever much easier if it's in a loving relationship.
Yes.
True.
So
Yes.
back to, I think that there was interest expressed talking about a loving relationship around intimacy as we grow older, how that is redefined, or how our needs might change, or how they don't change, or that was definitely one topic that people wanted to hear about. Jenny, um, is this a good time?
Sure. So, yeah, the topic of sexuality and intimacy across the life course is really fascinating, and there's not
Yeah.
really as much work that's been done around it as I would have hoped. A lot of what I read about aging and intimacy and sexuality is sort of the same stuff I read 30 years ago, which is fascinating to me. But what there are some I think really powerful perspectives that are important to keep in mind. And one is that this is an area in which there's actually quite a lot of continuity for
Yes.
individuals as they grow older. And so if I'm a person who really enjoys being physically close to another person, and enjoys touch and sexual intimacy, there's no reason why, if I've enjoyed it to this point in my life, why I wouldn't continue to desire it and enjoy it as I grow older. Um, so it's not a normal part of growing older, for our desire for intimacy and to express our sexuality to have that go away. Um, to be a human being is to crave intimacy, and we need it. In fact, we need touch, we need closeness. That doesn't necessarily mean that we need to have a relationship in which we have sexual intimacy, though that could be extremely important to us. And so another really important idea here is that our sexuality is it's actually a very broad idea. It has to do not just with making love with someone. It has to do with how we carry ourselves, how we feel in our body, how we express ourselves, how we dress, how we communicate. So it's our whole being. It's the energy with which we live. And I think it actually goes back in some ways to this theme of like the spirit of friendship. This all of this is about wanting to connect, with other human beings and other creatures. And so when we're talking about sexuality and intimacy as we grow older, the biggest impediments to being able to continue to have that is finding a partner. And if we have a partner, um, having a partner who still believes that that's an important part of expressing themselves and adapting, because our bodies do change as we grow older. And if we have certain chronic illnesses and maybe we're taking some medications for those, there are certain chronic illnesses and medications associated with being an older person that actually do negatively impact our ability to express ourselves sexually. So, male erection, a female orgasm, these things are connected to our health, our physical health, but also our emotional and psychological health. And so, the biggest barriers are lack of a partner, physical health, and then what we believe about our capacity to continue to be sexual and sexy as we grow older. And unfortunately, there's a lot of ageism in our society around sexuality as we grow older. The message still is that it's not normal and that it's kind of weird and even gross that older people would want to be engaged in sexual ways, even though we know that older adults continue to express themselves in sexual ways. So, this is a place where there's still a lot of work to be done in society to help people see that older people are people and that things that were important to us earlier in the life course continue to be important to us. But that we also do have to learn how to change and grow and adapt over time. Um, so I guess that's my little sort of overview spiel about, intimacy and sexuality as we grow older. One of the biggest problems for older women is that we tend to be living alone and without a partner the older we get. And in part, that's because we live longer on average than men do. And also because older men tend to repartner at a higher rate than older women do, and often with a younger partner. And so, there's also stigma still around being a single older woman who, whether you're straight or gay, who wants to continue to be sexual and intimate with other people. And, how do you do that safely? And how do you find partners with whom to be engaged? So it's complex, but it's also really, really important for well-being. Not for everyone. I mean, again, this is where each individual sort of sets their own baseline for what's important to them. I think what I would say is true of all human beings, though, is that we do need to feel cared for and connected to others in some way. And we suffer. We suffer when we're not seen and acknowledged and touched. And whether that's being touched by a dog who's our dear companion or another human being, and whether that's the touch of friendship or from a family member or from a lover, it's just very important. There's this thing called skin hunger that can happen. And I think, a lot of people who have been in quarantine by themselves are experiencing this yearning. It's just to be touched by someone. And the thought of not getting to have a hug is just enormously painful. And so all of these things are interconnected, and sexuality is one expression of it, but the fundamental desire is the human desire, the creaturely desire to be connected to others and to feel that closeness.
Yeah, I've thought that if I were in the situation of living somewhere by myself, I wouldn't look at quarantine as staying in my four walls, but having a close relationship with at least one other person where we would go back and forth sharing space. Uh, it, it's, keep 6 feet away from strangers and have a mask on while you're getting a haircut.
Hmm.
That's one.
Yeah, there's some, one of the unfortunate aspects of this pandemic has been that there are things we know now that we didn't know 3 months ago, right? Or 4 months ago. So this idea of expanding your bubble, your quarantine bubble, and planning with like your friends or extended family members, like early on, we want to be able to be around each other. And so we're going to limit our interactions with anybody else so that we can be around each other. We only really knew about that maybe a month or 6 weeks ago, when in some ways it was too late because a lot of people had already been either being really careful to quarantine or hadn't been careful enough. And so in a way, the knowledge is emerging right now about how we need to behave so that we cannot be socially isolated and lonely if we're in this kind of a situation again. But for now, like we're in this really weird zone where it's still not entirely safe. And so how do we get our needs met to be connected to other people, but do it in a way that's safe? And I think we're all working that out as individuals according to what our comfort level is, right? And that I think that is how it has to be. Does that make some sense? What I've just said?
Oh, yeah.
Good.
Yeah, and moving forward, like for instance, in the village, there are a lot of single women.
Mm-hmm.
And how can we support each other I mean, obviously the village does play a huge social role. That's one of the main reasons why we're all there. So, but just to be able to feel open and comfortable talking about our needs around
Mm-hmm.
closeness and intimacy, and whether it's with a lover or just making sure you can sit close to a friend on a
Yeah.
regular basis. But you're right. It's like all interconnected, and to take care of that part of ourselves, like a
Mm-hmm.
health practice in a way,
Mm-hmm.
it all works together. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
just starting the conversation, just being
Right.
comfortable, bringing up the issues that may come up. That as
Yes.
things change, or
Yes.
so I think
Yes.
a couple of the members were bold enough to say, "Hey, yeah, I want to talk about it," and they're women.
Yeah. Yeah. And
So
I'd certainly be happy to talk more about it.
yeah,
Um, I think that there are kinds of conversations and some really juicy questions
uh,
around which an entire targeted conversation could happen.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah,
and some ways to help people identify what's really important to them and then put language around it. Because on the topic of sexuality, there's just still a lot of shame.
yeah.
And so, so you have to
Um,
almost come at it from the side a little sneakily,
Uh,
so that and put it in that dark, deeper, larger context of being a human being and feeling well, and connected.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I
So.
think you brought it up. The newsflash is people age. There's a lot of people that are very sexual still. Like like
Mhm.
you said, culturally there's taboos. Like, ooh, older people having sex. No, that doesn't happen. Well, the truth is,
Mhm.
it does.
Yes, and it's not gross and wrong. I mean,
No,
that's the punchline to the message is, you know, it is happening all the time, and it's
exactly.
actually great. It's not
Yeah,
abnormal. It's
yeah,
not weird. It's not sinister. And so, yeah, I mean, one of my practices, and that I, as a teacher, but also just in my own life, is to try to be aware of how people actually live, in contrast to the stereotypes. And so, another thing that I hear often is, well, older people are invisible and we've abandoned them and, they're all alone. Well, I know that's true for some people, but I also know that there are a lot of older adults who are going hiking and gardening and, are lifelong learners and interconnected, and they're adapting, and they're not invisible. It's just maybe we don't see them. And so sort of shifting the mind toward what can I be aware of? Like, I want to see how people actually are living and the extent to which that does or doesn't match up with these kind of stereotypical views that we hold. And that's in no way to discount the fact that there are older adults who are isolated and lonely and don't have people taking care of them and looking out for them. But if that's our view that we apply to everyone, that's really problematic and dangerous. So just the balanced view that is not engaging, trafficking in the stereotypes.
Jenny, I have to say though that there is a reality around the fact as women getting older, there is an invisibility that happens. It's a very clear transition. And like you say, there's different ways of being sexual in your body, how you feel about yourself, how you present yourself, whatever. And that, I mean, I'm interested in that conversation. Like how does the transition from being a very being in the world visible, and then all of a sudden things change, and you don't get the same attention, you don't get the feedback around sexuality world, so yeah, it's a real thing,
and it's really complex also because some of that attention that we got when we were younger we didn't like at the time.
I know that.
It made me feel really vulnerable, and I didn't like being sexualized all the time. I wanted to be taken seriously.
Yeah, right.
And then when it goes away, it's like, what the hell? Like, wait a second, right? And so then seeing that, like, just seeing that and thinking, wow, okay, that's interesting. And now what am I going to do? Like,
that's right. That's the thing I'm bringing up.
Yeah. And I think we definitely need each other to explore that now what happens.
Yeah. Well, anyway, that's a conversation I would welcome all of us to continue as women.
That'd be juicy.
I think so. It's like I think it's like a part of our, like Audrey, it for some women it's a big part of our wholeness. Like how do we see ourselves in the world, even as sexual beings? That's a part of kind of the health of the whole person. Yeah.
That's great.
Well, so to be continued. Let's
Okay.
figure out how to have that conversation. Yeah.
That would be neat. Really neat. Maybe we can, Heather, do another salon around just around the female image.
That'd be good. Use the calendar.
And would that be on your calendar, Sue?
Ray's the one who does calendars very well too.
I don't know. Calendar, what date are you asking about?
Well, we're not doing quite yet.
Continued.
Yes. Visionary. This is like a seating session.
Okay, so Tessa, if you send me email, my old computer is gonna have to go to the shop.
Oh.
For help, I think. And this computer,
it's in the works.
This computer that we're on knows me as Ray Singer 2, the numeral 2.
Right.
At gmail.com.
Okie dokie. Well, we got both of your emails, I think. So you'll be good.
Good. Great. Thank you. That was really
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for
Audrey,
joining me. I see that we're past our time. So thank you so much for spending this time with me and
yeah.
having this
Thank
conversation.
And Audrey,
Yeah.
I was happy to learn about your gardening passion too. I didn't know that about you. Yeah.
He's got too much energy.
No, one of the things I never
So it's wonderful he could do that.
I never learned how to exit this program.
Oh, look for it with a red dot or something.
There's
Well,
at
you
the
can,
bottom, there's a little
yeah,
round button that says
it says
leave.
leave.
Don't worry
Leave.
about it.
Oh, no, a month from now, you won't have to sign in.
I'll excuse you right now, Audrey. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Well, thank you,
Okay,
Jenny.
Thank
That was a
you.
wonderful
Yeah,
we know when we're
discussion.
not
Very
wanted.
thought-provoking.
yeah. Thanks for coming. This was fun.
Okay.
It was
Thank you, Jenny.
Bye. Nice
Bye.
seeing you. Bye. Bye.